A lot of people are nervous when they go into early stage startups because there's no process. Everything is new. The product is new.
I think what is easy about early stage startups is it is a really tight-knit group, right? There's only so many people. I was employee 25. And so it's really easy to get to know everyone across the organization, including engineering, for example, right? I can have one-on-ones with the CEO of the company, which is crazy. Now, to your point, what made it really hard is, there is no kind of path to success yet because everyone is new, especially being new to sales, not knowing how to sell, not knowing the product. Like I was having to learn everything all at once.
Go in and start something from nothing.
Emma, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, of course.
It's been a little while since we caught up, and
I know.
I've been looking forward to this because being able to kind of a little bit more formally interview you and hear how much of the decisions that led to all the success that you've had in enterprise sales was on purpose, had a master plan behind it, how much of it was maybe some bumps and bruises along the way, how much of it was just kind of smooth sailing. But to kind of dig in, I'll give everybody a little bit of background. So Emma is somebody I've known now for about 5 years, had a really successful academic career at Auburn, then went on into recruiting. And then I got the pleasure of being, while I was president at Forethought, of recruiting her in to come and be one of our very first reps to come in and define what was kind of going to be the future of sales in the AI business that we were building there. So what I'd like to start off with is tell us a little bit about the story in the beginning. So you're coming out of school, you're finishing up your degree. What led to recruiting? What led to kind of your first role there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny when you're like, was there a master plan? There certainly was not a master plan. I studied communication at Auburn. I was one of those kids that had no idea what they wanted to do with their life. So I actually graduated a semester early, and didn't know what I wanted to do. I was on all the job boards, kind of looking at different things that interested me. But at the end of the day, I was out to dinner one night and I met my future boss at dinner, and they were wearing an Auburn shirt. And for anyone watching, if you're an Auburn fan, we say War Eagle. And so I said War Eagle, and they said it back. And then we started talking, and it turns out that they own a software consulting firm in Atlanta. And they were like, hey, we're looking for recruiters. You should come in and interview. And so I went in, interviewed, and I got the job. So that is how I got my first job out of school. Definitely kind of fell into my lap. And, I can continue on with the story if you want, but that's how I got my first job.
Okay, so you leave Auburn, you meet an alumni. So first off, you graduate from a great university. You're going out to dinner. You meet an alumni who owns an incredible company. Then what happened? So when I reached out to you a couple years later, you'd been in recruiting for a little while.
Yeah.
What made us like, you know what? Maybe it's worth taking a risk in this early stage company in tech, all the way across the country too. She ended up moving to Utah.
Yeah.
What made you respond to the note? And what kind of opened your mind to, tech is something, this type of tech company, all the way across the United States? What opened your mind up to that opportunity?
Yeah, definitely. So I liked recruiting. I didn't love it. I loved being in tech. I found it very exciting and interesting. It felt like the place to be. It felt like kind of this is the future. I like that I'm in tech without, having a degree in computer science, right? And so knew I wanted to stay in tech. When you reached out, it was one of those things where people had always told me, oh, you might be good at sales, right? And it was something that was kind of in the back of my mind, but I didn't feel like I had the experience, right? I was in recruiting. And so when I was looking at other jobs, it made sense to look at recruiting roles. And so when you reached out, I was like, well, maybe this is my big break, and funny enough, it was. And so kind of started exploring, started looking into, Forethought, the company, and AI in general. And then I think that the thing that really drew me to Forethought specifically was the people. I remember interviewing with just some really impressive people, including yourself. And I remember kind of looking into you and doing some research. And, when you Google Dan Watkins, it was, different podcasts and, your success at Qualtrics and all of that. And I remember thinking, if I want to get into sales, it seems like this guy knows what's up and has clearly had success in that role. So, I'd love to learn from the best. And so that was part of it. And then, I remember interviewing people, Forbes 30 under 30, and, that went to Harvard. And I remember getting huge imposter syndrome of just like, I've never sold before. I didn't go to Harvard, right? And interview after interview kept going well. And I was like, if I get an offer to go to Forethought, I am going to take it. And I did.
Nice. One of the things that I don't think a lot of people know, I think recruiting is one of the best ways to get into sales.
Yeah.
If you go and you look at it, you have to be able to go in and sell what's the hardest decision for most people in their life, their career decision.
Yep.
And then in your case, when you compound it with changing a little bit of industry, changing states, moving all the way across the country, it's a big decision. And so I remember when I reached out to you thinking, okay, she's nailed it in recruiting. And unlike a lot of recruiters, the job hop, you'd stuck it out with that company for a while.
Mhm.
And so you showed loyalty, great university, come into tech. Now, what I want to talk about is you transition into Forethought,
Mhm.
an early stage company. I think you were employed like 20. What do you
Yeah.
remember your employee number?
I think it was like 25.
25. So you come in and we had just barely, I think we were even still in, were we still in my basement or had we got the
No,
office?
we had, well, actually it was peak COVID, so we didn't have anything at that point. We were transitioning into the co-working space.
There we are. Okay.
Mm.
And so tell us a little bit about what in your past had prepared you most for the role. And what when you came in was kind of a big shock, and like anything from a lot of people are nervous when they go into early stage startups because there's no process. Everything is new. The product is new. Tell us a little bit about what was easy as you came in and maybe a couple things that were really difficult.
Yeah, definitely. So I think what is easy about early stage startups is it is a really tight-knit group, right? There's only so many people. I was employee 25. And so it's really easy to get to know everyone across the organization, including engineering, for example, right? I got really close with engineering to actually understand the product. I can
Yeah.
have one-on-ones with the CEO of the company, which is crazy. You don't get that at a big company. And so as far as kind of learning the product goes, I think that made it a lot easier. Now, to your point, what made it really hard is, there is no kind of path to success yet because everyone is new. Especially being new to sales, not knowing how to sell, not knowing the product. Like I was having to learn everything all at once. And so the first part of your question is, what do you think led to my success and, what contributed to that? I think that there are certain things that people inherently are good at. I think work ethic is something that, you learn at a very young age. I wouldn't say that I learned that in my first job out of college, right? I've had a really strong work ethic from the beginning. And so I think that that is one of them. And, early stage startups are not for everyone. And I like to tell
Yeah.
people that very straightforward, right? It's not for everyone. You are going to have to work very, very hard. It can certainly pay off. And I love it. I continue to work at startups after this. But you do have to work a lot more than others, right? And so I think that that is one of them. I think asking for help is really important. And that's something that I did from the beginning. And you got to use your resources, right? I read tons of books. I listened to tons of podcasts. I did get a mentor, which, we can talk about later on in the conversation, but you really have to make your own luck. And I think that not everyone is willing to do that. And you certainly have to do that at an early stage startup. And that's hard and uncomfortable. But if you want to see success, that's what you have to do.
One of the things that, and you talked a little bit about this, but I talked to people thinking about transitioning into a Series A or early stage startup is that advantage of if you are willing to work your tail off and leverage the executive team, you're going to be working either directly for or really close to the executive team. What impact did working directly with the director of sales, the president, the CEO, the head of product, like having access to those individuals, were there moments that because you had access to that, you were able to have more success, or what kind of impact did that have?
Huge impact. And I think I noticed it more as the company grew, because at first it's just normal, right? And again, this
Yeah.
is my first sales job. I didn't know any different that like I could call up the CTO on the phone and he would answer me. Like that is wild, you know?
Yeah.
But I didn't know at the time that that was really crazy. But as the company grew and new people joined and didn't have that relationship with the executive team, that's when I kind of went, oh wow, this is really unique and special and very cool that I kind of have an in. And so I would say the impact that it had, specifically, I'm thinking a lot of kind of product related stuff. So like, close relationship to CEO and CTO, right? Understanding kind of what's on the product roadmap and really getting technical. I remember that was really important early on is sales reps knowing the product. And so I think from that standpoint, it was really helpful. But then like, close connections to you and to our director of sales, as far as kind of learning, like I felt so privileged to be able to learn from some people who have incredible experience, your background, our head of sales background, like incredible experience. And so having a direct line to that is amazing versus, at a huge company where your sales manager is, a 25-year-old out of college, that's very different experiences. And so I feel really lucky that that was my first sales experience.
Okay. And then as you go look at your first few deals, so as you go back in, you're building your pipeline. I remember, so we used a system to go in and measure how hard people work and how successful. Emma was always one of the hardest working, one of the most successful. What led to a couple of your first few deals that you actually want to try to get as tactical as you can there from, how did you apply your work ethic? What either if you leveraged relationships in the company to go in and get those deals, how did you win your first few deals when the company had so few initial clients?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think back to some of
But I
those.
know it was about 4 years ago, so
I know.
it's been a while.
The first thing that comes to mind from kind of a tactical standpoint is involving as many people as possible. And I still do this today when relevant. Now, of course, I'm not trying to waste anyone's time, but I would much rather kind of get a slap on the wrist for asking for help versus losing a deal and not bringing people in. And I think
Yeah.
that especially as a very inexperienced sales rep who's working some pretty big deals, right? At a startup, you have the opportunity to work some crazy deals. I'm talking to COOs of a very large company and I don't know what I'm doing, right? I would way
Yeah.
rather involve people and even have to split a deal, right? And get it in versus, losing the deal because I was too afraid to ask for help. So I think that that is definitely a big one. I did
That's
have
huge.
a
A lot of people are too prideful. They'd
yeah,
rather see can they win on their own, lose
yep,
the deal, and then they miss out on the growth.
yep. And transparently, I have never been slapped on the wrist for that, right? I actually get very good feedback about that from my managers of like, thank you so much for doing this and bringing these in, and we won the deal, right? And so, yeah, I guess just kind of getting your pride out of the way is a big one for sure, which is hard for sales reps because normally we are pretty prideful and think we're the best at things. But I would say the other thing that I did, and I recommend to anyone who is kind of looking to get into sales, is just find a mentor. There was so much that I didn't know. And at an early stage company, like you said, there's not a lot of processes, there's not a lot of training that goes on. And so find people that are doing really well, they're crushing it. Find people that align to your sales style, right? That was really important for me from the beginning. Bring them in. That's how I was able to get a lot of things across the line because I had a lot of the kind of natural skills that you need. But when it comes to the really nitty gritty sales, kind of driving a deal forward, deal velocity, things like that, I struggled. And that's where,
Yeah.
people that came before me were able to help.
Awesome. What do you wish you had known in the very, very beginning? Like if you could go now and impart this knowledge on yourself back then, say, hey, Emma, this is how your life's going to kind of go work out. What would you go back and say, to give yourself that knowledge? What do you wish you had known?
Yeah. I would probably tell myself that it's not that serious and we're not saving lives. And I try to remind myself that a lot. Obviously, what we do is very important. Software is great. It makes the world go round. I'm not performing heart surgery. And I think that really early on, I would get very stressed out. I would get very emotional in my deals, for the good and bad, right? If things were going well, I'd get really, really excited. If things were going poorly, I would get really, really upset. And I think that the thing that has kind of progressed me in my career so much is being able to kind of keep my emotions more level. And I certainly did not do that early on in my sales career. And I think it's something that's very important because in sales, the highs are high and the lows are low.
I think that's huge. I think a lot of people end up turning to pretty intense vices later on in their life in sales because those highs are so intense and then the lows are so bad. If you can keep that level head, that's huge.
Yeah. And you're performing best when you are healthy. And, work-life balance is important. Sleep and exercise and all of that. I do my best work when I am healthiest.
100%. If you go and you look at foundational things that weren't in place, what advice would you give to founders as they're going in and starting their companies? They're hiring, and you've seen a few companies like this now. So as they're hiring their first few sales reps, building out maybe their first sales manager, what are some foundational things that you would advise companies get that? It could be anything from training to CRM stuff, literally anything that comes to your mind.
Yeah. Great question. I think the first
There's
thing
a
that comes
crazy bug flying around.
I think it really starts with hiring the right people, which is, that's a whole other topic, right? But I think that if you hire the right people with the right work ethic, people that are willing to put in the effort, are very smart, knowledgeable, you're gonna be set up for success. And if you hire the right people, you're not gonna, it's hard to put so many processes in place at an early stage company. And so that wouldn't even be my advice, right? Because you're gonna end up changing a lot of these things anyway. So it's like, find the right people that, can do a lot of things on their own and don't need kind of hand holding, I think is a really big one. I'm trying to think of one thing that I see a lot and has happened at a lot of different startups that I've worked at is hiring enterprise reps too soon. I think that a lot of founders get really excited at the idea of selling really big enterprise logos, but then they hire really expensive, experienced people and the product isn't ready for that. That's something that I see a lot that I typically give advice on.
Maybe without mentioning names, talk a little bit about that, because that's a big difference. If I even go look at the early days together at Forethought, you came in as an earlier AE. We also had some enterprise reps, but you had a lot more success. Why do you think that happened? Why were you able to thrive, whereas maybe traditional enterprise reps struggled?
Yeah, I think that this is something I thought about a lot at Forethought, but one of the things that I had the upper hand on is that Forethought was my first and only sales experience versus some of these other folks came from a lot more established companies. They were used to a lot of processes in place. And so going to a company where there was not any processes in place was very jarring and they weren't used to that, right? And so it felt like they weren't necessarily set up for success in that way. It was all I knew. So I was kind of going with it and running with it. But I think the other thing that I attribute a lot of my success to at Forethought is just really ingraining myself like in the company, in the product. I knew everyone at the company, like I said, really made sure to understand the product so that when I'm talking to customers, I was an expert in the space. And I think that a lot of people just don't want to do that. And, sales reps have a bad reputation of just kind of knowing just enough to kind of get by. And I really believe that the best sales reps are experts in the space and their prospects and their customers see them as a trusted resource that they're going to actually learn something from. And I think that attributed to a lot of my success at Forethought.
So if I summarize it, because you didn't have any of the great examples of here's how a really good process could look, you were able to come in and thrive without process.
Yeah.
And so like you could be part of building it. But the other part of it is you actually forced yourself to learn the product.
Yeah.
And that's
I know.
I've seen that everywhere. Like people don't choose to do that. They, just as you said, they go and learn just enough. Why did you originally force yourself to learn the product so much? Like what led to that? And have you continued to do that throughout your career?
Yeah. I think it made sense to me, right? I think at the end of the day, I was kind of like, I'm selling this. I want to make sure that I know it.
Yeah.
I think some of it probably was my pride too, of like, I'm going to be on a call with a technical person. I want to make sure that I don't fall on my face in front of them. Right. And so that was part of it. But I found that I sell the best. I form the best connections with my prospects when I'm very knowledgeable in the space. And so I just saw that worked and it has continued to work for me. I think that a lot of people don't do that because if you're at a bigger company where people know your name, if you're at Salesforce, you can cold call someone and say, hey, I'm from Salesforce, and people are going to know exactly what that is. It's just a little bit of an easier kind of intro and conversation starter, right? Versus if you're working at an early stage company that no one knows who you are, you're going to have to kind of step up your game to make sure that you really know what's going on.
Yeah, and I've seen it. Like Tableau actually published a really interesting study on this. They went and studied those that had a mastery of their product and had done their product certification. I don't remember the percentage anymore, but sold significantly higher than those that just came in from the outside, tried to go sell just using sales technique. Being a master of the product is huge.
Totally.
As you go and you look at, so you, after a couple years at Forethought, you had a lot of success. How many promotions? Remind me, how many promotions you earned while you were at Forethought?
It's hard to say. There were some informal ones, some formal ones. I think probably around 3.
Okay, so 3 promotions in 2 years, and now you got a decision to make. One of your internal mentors at the company goes off to another company and wants you to come with them. How did you kind of weigh that decision? So after 3 promotions, really kind of catapulting your career, how did you make the decision, okay, now it's time to go in and kind of spread my wings and try something new? And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was a very hard decision, as you can imagine, because things were going really well at Forethought. I was, I think, the #1 rep at the time, but my mentor who kind of got me to where I was left and wanted to bring me with him. I think there were a couple of different things. One being, I was very conscious of the fact that Forethought was my only sales experience, right? And I did like the idea of getting experience somewhere else. And looking back, I'm very glad that I did, right? And each company, I've learned so many more things, right? And again, at Forethought, I kind of was learning things as I go, learning things on my own. And so I did like the idea of having a little bit more structure, maybe some formal sales training, things like that. In addition to just kind of, let's try something new.
Yeah.
But it was a very emotional decision just because, I had been there from the beginning, was doing well. I loved the people so much. And so it was a really hard decision. Money was also involved in that decision. So
Oh, yeah.
and I'm very lucky that I was able to jump quite a bit. And I, attribute a lot of kind of the startup space to that.
Yeah, and then just advice for everybody as you go in and watch this. Emma's story where you come in early stage, choose to work your tail off, master the product, learn from everybody that you can, end up choosing to become #1. You're able to leverage that for the rest of your career. You're able to tell that story, and then people will pay you a lot more because you made it through a startup, and most don't make those same decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it definitely kind of catapulted things, which I'm very thankful for. And I think too, just the advice I would give is, form those relationships, right? Almost all the jobs that I've gotten in my career have been through people that I know. And because I'm a hard worker and people know that I'm good at what I do, people want to hire me, and I unfortunately was a part of layoffs at a company. And the next day had meetings set up for me by people. And I just felt so grateful to have that network and connections, but you don't get that if you're not, doing the work and good at what you do. So the last thing I would just add on that too is people want to help people that work hard. And I firmly believe that. Early on at Forethought, I had no idea what I was doing, but everyone saw that I was working so hard. And so because of that, people wanted to help me, including yourself, right? You loved that I was putting in the work. So therefore you spent time making sure that I ended up being good at my job, right? And I think that it's really easy for people to want to help people that, want to help themselves.
It's because it's easy to believe, okay, if I go in and help this individual who will work hard, something will come of it.
Yep.
It's
And
like if you heard you could invest money in a stock and that company has a whole bunch of smart people that don't work hard,
Yep.
or invest money in a company and you're going to go be an advisor with them, but they all work really hard, maybe not as smart as these individuals, this team always wins. They work hard, they'll learn the things that they go to need. In your case, you've got the smarts and the hard work.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about, over the last few years, you've experienced a few different companies. What are trends that you noticed, things that make companies struggle? And what are things that you've seen because of this? These are things that led to some of the company's success that then helped you.
Yeah. Great question. So that was 2 parts. The first part was
Trends on what are things that you saw as you've looked at the last few companies, including your current company now. What are things that they do wrong that slow the company down? And that could be top down, that could be bottoms up, that could be culture, it could be process, literally anything that comes to your mind. What are things that are holding companies back right now?
Yeah. I think the most success I've seen, I mean, transparently, is a product market fit. I think that that is a really big thing. And that's something that I evaluate very heavily now when I look at companies. And the company that I'm at right now, I'm very fortunate that the product market fit is there. And because of that, we're doing well. And, that matters so much.
Yeah.
I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I think over hiring, overspending definitely can get in the way. I think that a lot of, companies get really excited about hiring, very expensive, experienced people, which makes sense, right? These people have a very big track record of success, but typically you're having to spend a lot of money and maybe your product isn't even ready for these people. And so that's something that I have seen kind of time and time again. As far as like what brings company success, like I said, I think product market fit is a really big one. I think hiring the right people, so hard workers. I think
You could give up on every characteristic other than hard work. Would you say like that's almost enough? If you just pick hard work, will the team win?
So I want to caveat what I said on hard work, because I think the whole work smarter, not harder also is very relevant. I remember I was interviewing actually for the job at Forethought with the head of sales. And I remember kind of talking her through how I was able to have success in my first job. And I was talking a lot about hard work and how I was kind of first one in, last one out, right? And she was like, okay, well, that's great, but you don't always want to be first one in, last one out. If you want to work as little as possible and do the best that you can, right? And so we kind of talked about that. And that is something that I think about a lot. And that's something I think a lot about in my job now, is kind of the scalability of what I'm doing. And I have implemented a lot of things in my sales process now to try to make it so, I'm working smarter, not harder. I'm not spending hours on end doing something that's not going to have a really big impact. I'm totally okay spending a lot of hours on something that is going to have a very big impact. But if there's
Yeah.
ways I can automate things, right? I'm using virtual sales rooms right now to try to help sell when I'm not on a call with a customer, right? So things like that I think are very important too. But in my mind, that's also working hard, right? I spend the
Yeah.
time to evaluate different tools to help make my life easier so that I can sell more,
So if you're going to work, there should be a return on that investment. Don't just work to work and
Exactly.
put hours and log time.
Exactly.
Go in and make sure that what you're doing is going to get a return on that investment.
Right. And if something isn't working, change it. Right. And that's something that we talked about a lot, is you got to experiment, right? You got to try things. If it's not working, try something else. Because to your point, just working hard isn't going to get you there, right? It's going to help and it's going to, show people that you care, but you do have to make sure that, you're doing the right things.
Okay. So companies that are doing things well, they're not over hiring. They're being mindful about, okay, hiring one employee at a time to make sure that it's scaling.
Yep.
They're making sure that the product is landing and that the customers are renewing. So
Yep.
there's product market fit and then natural expansion opportunities.
Mhm.
They're hiring incredibly hard workers that are willing to kind of learn the product,
Mhm.
get a return on their investment. So they're not just going to kind of blindly follow, but they're going to work their tails off. When they see gold, they're going to chase that gold. Anything else? If you were to kind of, any last bit of advice you would either give to a founder that's going to go make their first few hires? Actually, let's do that. First advice for a founder and their first couple of hires, if there's anything else, or you feel like, Dan, I've covered that, we're good. And
No,
then
that,
a new
yeah.
hire that's going to start.
Yeah. I was actually talking to a founder the other day and she was asking advice on this, but I think all of what we said and high aptitude, like people that just have a genuine curiosity, right? Are going to work hard. You have a track record of success, and that can be sports in college, right? That doesn't have to be a very successful sales career. And I firmly believe that, but there needs to be some kind of track record of success in whatever job it was before. I think that that's probably the biggest thing. Okay. And then what was the second question for people?
So if there's somebody that's just about to go in and start, like we just helped this lady, she had 1 year of experience.
Mhm.
She's going in to go work for an AI and robotics company.
Mhm.
She's the first sales hire working directly for the CEO. Think of somebody just like that, going in and starting their first major sales role, early stage startup,
Mhm.
first employee got to go work for the CEO. What advice would you have for them as the last kind of parting bits of wisdom?
Outside of all the other things we discussed, I would say don't be afraid to speak up. It can be very intimidating when you are reporting to the CEO, right? But the CEO hired you for a reason. You are the one who is having to do the selling at the end of the day, right? It's not anyone else on the team. You're responsible for those numbers. So if you need anything, if you think that something's headed in the wrong direction, right? You have the very cool and unique opportunity to communicate that to the CEO. Again, you were hired for a reason. Speak up. I know that's hard and intimidating, but I think that people who don't end up down the line, they're on the wrong path, things went poorly, and, regrets to that. So outside of all the other things I talked about, that would probably be my biggest thing.
Okay. So Emma, thank you so much for your time. Everybody, this is Emma Reifenberger, one of the most successful reps I've ever had the pleasure of working with. 5 years ago, decided to come in and jump into an early stage startup and is now a highly successful, highly paid enterprise rep. I hope you take the advice seriously. And Emma, thanks so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Dan.